want better signage. We want to make it intuitive for everybody to know how to evacuate.
Florida showed America how an evacuation is done. Does Denver even have a plan? And why are the American citizens suffering after hurricane damage to our territories being ignored? Your words in remembrance of 9/11.
I wrote the word strength.
The Broncos Stadium gets rid of a dim bulb. How about the rest of the sign? And the joy of painting packs the house in Denver.
I'm wearing the wig, everyone else is wearing the wig. It's not weird at all. It adds to the atmosphere of the class.
It's not weird at all. It's next.
Florida is a model of how to get people out of town in a hurry. Its hurricane evacuation doubtlessly saved lives. It got us thinking about Denver's plan, should our metro area ever need to be evacuated. Thankfully, our potential disasters of that scale don't occur annually with the weather. But our Marshall Zellinger asked, should the unthinkable happen, a terror attack or an industrial accident, where are the exits?
Every day, hazardous materials go up and down the rail line, right next to the stadium, right next to Pepsi Center, right through Elitch Gardens.
Ryan Broughton doesn't mean to be a buzzkill. He's the head of Denver's Office of Emergency Management. And while we'll never have to evacuate from a hurricane in Denver, he's the guy in the basement of the city and county building who has to plan for the worst.
We look at what's most consequential. So we would be looking at, for example, a train derailment. We also have about 230 facilities within Denver that use hazardous materials in great quantity.
Raise your hand if you know where you're supposed to evacuate if you're told to get out of the city. Not where you want to go, but where you're supposed to go.
The best example is that Broadway and Colfax is the center of the city.
Picture it like a clock. Northeast goes 76 or 70. Southeast goes 70, Highway 83 or 25. Southwest goes south to 25. Northwest goes 36, 287 or 25. You don't go west because of congestion in the mountains. With the city only able to handle about 34,000 cars an hour, any guesses how long it would take to evacuate a 25-mile radius of the Denver metro area? Guess now, I'm about to play the answer.
So the evacuation clearance time for our city is 18 or 19 hours if we assume 3 to 4 people in every vehicle. A lot more if there's only one person in the vehicle, about 40 hours.
And for those heading to the Broncos game tonight, the team won't tell us its emergency plan for, quote, security reasons. But don't worry, Ryan's got our number.
So I can draw on a map a circle around the Broncos Stadium, for example, identify they should either shelter in place or evacuate, and then provide that to every mobile device within that geographic area.
If you were wondering, like I was, I've never given my phone number to the city's Office of Emergency Management. How are they going to tell me if I'm at the Broncos game that I'm in an emergency situation? It's treated just like an Amber Alert, and it's that wireless system, so you don't have to sign up for anything. It's based on location.
A good thing that they've improved the Wi-Fi situation there at the stadium. And people are going to say, listen, we're not in a hurricane zone. Don't worry about this kind of thing. But they're actively planning a lot of facilities in town.
And they want signage, because we asked the question. There's nothing that says, take this route for evacuation. They want us to know ahead of time, because we had the floods a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
There's unexpected things will happen.
Like the clock system, highways, state highways. Interesting. Marshall, thank you. They are Americans, and they're in a world of trouble. People living on the U.S. territory islands in the Caribbean that were hit by Hurricane Irma, the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. Yet they've received relatively little media attention. We have heard your very valid concerns about this fact. Today, we caught up with a Coloradan who used to live on St. John, St. Thomas. She shared some perspective with us. She says she's been inundated with posts on Facebook from friends who are still on the islands. Their cell towers are knocked over, so there's very little way to get in touch with people. The power's out. They're trying to figure out how to get help, how to get America to care.
It's pretty frustrating. Florida is getting a lot of the attention right now, and I'm not saying that that's not deserved as well. The islands are all but devastated and gone, essentially. So yeah, they really need as much help as possible.
So unsourced reports are one thing, anecdotal reports are another. We rely for our coverage of the Caribbean on our partners at NBC. So we asked NBC News directly today, what are their resources in these U.S. territories? NBC has a crew in Puerto Rico, Ron Mott, probably you know the name, some other staff members. They've been turning stories for NBC News. NBC does not have a crew in the U.S. Virgin Islands. There's been a lot of debate of late about TV reporters and meteorologists standing out in the storm. I won't rehash all the arguments about whether seeing someone leaning into a hurricane keeps other people from trying it, or whether it's an exercise in hypocrisy as we tell people to stay out of the storm. I'll just ask you this. Journalists are supposed to serve you, the community. So, Are you well served by this type of storm coverage? Do you find it instructive, interesting, or overwrought and irresponsible? We would like to hear from you. You can email next@9news.com or get our attention with the hashtag HeyNext. I do read every single word you write to us, and it does inform our decision making. If you watched a football game over the weekend, it was tough to miss the big fundraising call, the TV ad featuring former American presidents. They want you to donate to something called the One America Appeal. So we asked our Verify team to verify where your money goes if you give. Here's Brandon Riddiman.
After talking about the devastation of those two hurricanes, the ad asks you to give with the endorsement of all 5 living former presidents.
Please donate to oneamericaappeal.org. America needs you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you donate, technically it goes first to the Presidential Library for George H.W. Bush in a special account. They've promised to transfer all that money to 3 charities. In Texas, the Hurricane Harvey Relief Fund, sponsored by Houston's mayor, and the Rebuild Texas Fund, kicked off by the founder of Dell Computers. The third, in Florida, is the state's official disaster relief fund. We do not yet know what percentage of your donation would go to each of these 3 charities, which makes some sense since people are still adding up all the damage. Both Texas charities promise to spend 100% of donations on relief and recovery. Same goes for the official state fund in Florida, which has a history of paying out for hurricanes there and posts its financial data online. It gives money to a bunch of partner charities at the local level in Florida, including churches, humanitarian groups, and other disaster responders. The Texas funds are expected to do something similar. So think of all of this as a super fund for these 2 hurricanes. If you want an easy way to give once to victims of both, it's meant to help you do that, with a promise that the super fund won't take a cut. Eventually, people will get paid when this goes out as grants to each charity doing the work on the ground. Bottom line, if you give, you're trusting a charity started by 5 former presidents to more or less steer it in the right direction.
That was Brandon Riddiman reporting. 16 years ago on this day, Coloradans stopped and stared in disbelief at what was unfolding on television screens before them. Today, we went to Broomfield to ask some of our neighbors to remember 9/11 in a word.
I wrote the word community.
I wrote brave.
Thank you's my word for everything they do.
I wrote the word strength.
Just can't put it into words. I remember exactly where I was.
Yep, almost like it was yesterday.
I was going to work listening to talk radio.
Heard the live broadcast on the radio when they saw the planes begin to hit.
Plane had just flown in to one of the World Trade Towers.
Sorry. A lot of tears. A lot of, we don't know what's going on.
Fear and shock and just sorrow.
I didn't think I would get emotional, but that's what I remember about it. I remember everybody giving hugs, reaching out to people, whether you were there or not, making sure you were okay.
Heroes, just because I think of all the people that went running toward the disaster as opposed to away from it.
Didn't think about anything except what they could do to help and who they could save.
Police officers, firefighters are just my heroes always.
I can't do much out there, but I certainly come by and, you know, say thank you to those folks who did stand up for us.
America. Still hard to deal with.
Next, we see what 9 News viewers saw here 16 years ago today, and our recommendations for some thoughtful reading tonight in remembrance of 9/11. The Broncos play this evening at whatever it's called field. Speaking of, you see a little issue?
And we celebrate all things happy. Happy trees, happy mountains.
And happy heads of hair fill an art class in Denver. Next. The dimmest bulb in the Broncos organization has been replaced. talking about the dumbass in Sports Authority Field. Sports Authority couldn't afford to keep the naming rights in bankruptcy, but stadium management says it can't afford to have the Sports Authority sign looking half-assed. A spokesman said they decided to back that S up because, quote, while there are no plans to officially rebrand the stadium in this interim period, it is important for us to make sure it looks presentable at all times.
Weather may be a factor for the big football game tonight. I'm meteorologist Kathy Sabin. So far cloudy, dry here in the city. Temperatures back in the mid-80s this afternoon. A little bit above average, but not in record territory. And on radar, we are tracking a couple of thunder showers moving off the foothills. There's one just south of the city, right on that Douglas-Elbert line that has indeed produced about an inch of rain. A lot of thunder and lightning. That's probably the biggest threat for the game at kickoff time tonight is lightning, not the rain. Dealing with rain and wind across Atlanta and Charleston as Tropical Storm Irma moves inland, weakening, but still a storm to be reckoned with. One we'll be tracking during the overnight period. Meantime, for Colorado, high pressure sets up, kind of a dirty ridge, allowing in enough moisture and cloud cover for isolated storms back in the forecast tomorrow. Storms will move out tonight. Skies will be slow to clear, and we have another warm day coming up, but a little unusual for September, one of our drier, more comfortable months with the crystal clear blue sky, something we have yet to see every day. Brief shower rumble of thunder tonight, then clearing. Temperatures back in the upper 80s tomorrow. We get you into the weekend with a little bit of a cooling trend. Fall-like temperatures in the 70s on Saturday.
Tonight, our reading recommendations are Remembrances of 9/11. Both are worth setting aside a bit of time for. Each year on this day, former White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer tweets a timeline of 9/11 from his perspective, right at President Bush's side. Small details that have largely been forgotten, like the object that was spotted flying at Bush's ranch in Texas. It was just a crop dusting plane, false alarm. And the struggle between Bush and his Secret Service detail over when it was safe to return to Washington. You can find a link to Ari Fleischer's Twitter account on the next Facebook page, where there's also a link to a remarkable piece of journalism done by The New Yorker just 6 months after 9/11. The story, entitled "The Real Heroes Are Dead," is the story of Rick Rescorla, who led an exceptional and interesting life across 4 continents and through 3 wars before he ever ended up as Morgan Stanley's Director of Security and was evacuating the South Tower, where he got his people out and was last seen running back inside. And that story is also linked on the next Facebook page. The terrible images of 9/11 are not aired constantly, even on this day, and for good reason. That doesn't mean, in our view, though, that we shouldn't ever see the true horror of that day. 1 in 5 Coloradans was born after 9/11. Many more are too young to recall the pictures firsthand. You're about to see some of those difficult images and see some scenes of great compassion from that day. All of them pulled from the 9 News archives from 9/11, trying to keep America's promise to never forget.
Get away from the window! Get away from the window! I think World Trade fell. Where's Mike? Right. Holy Christ. Here comes blast!
The next thing I saw, I mean, you gotta look at it, the bottom elevator, the glass, just flames exploded out the front of the World Trade Center. Glass flew everywhere.
Into, oh my goodness.
Oh God.
There's another one.
Oh.
Oh my goodness, there's another one.
This seems to be on purpose.
How could something like this happen? How could it happen?
Today we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
I think we all have struggled today with a way to define just the impact of what was witnessed here in New York.
Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
Our next question comes from a pair of Wyomingites visiting Taste of Colorado. Kelly and Rhonda Priest from Cheyenne wanted to know why they couldn't buy a bottle of water with the cap still on it. We were perplexed, they wrote. We asked a Denver policeman. He informed us this is a typical practice at Denver festivals, including sporting events. He admitted he doesn't understand the logic behind this practice either.
All right, so this is not a citywide policy. The Downtown Denver Partnership says that individual venues and event organizers can decide to do it for safety. There have been some incidents at NFL games in particular where full capped water bottles were thrown, and they're heavy enough to be pretty dangerous projectiles. Bankruptcy Field at Mile High has its concession workers remove bottle caps there. So Kelly and Rhonda, it looks like Taste of Colorado was just being safe, you know, in case they ran out of turkey legs and all you crazy Wyomingites decided to riot. Not all artists suffer for their craft. Some are actually really happy people. Our Ann Herbst found a class where folks pay tribute to a painter who is the happiest of them all.
You might not be Monet. Your brush strokes might not invoke Van Gogh. But there's a place in Denver where you can be a famous artist.
We're gonna get started.
If just for one night.
We're here to paint happy trees, happy clouds.
Mr. Bob Ross. I am Bob Ross.
I'm going to teach you how to paint this gorgeous painting Bob Ross style.
Cherry Creek's Canvas and Cocktails transforms into a happy little studio once a month.
It's going to give you a gorgeous avocado color.
A tribute to the PBS painting star from the 80s and 90s.
You're wearing wigs, for goodness sake, you guys, okay?
Yes, it makes a good holding place.
Tortured artist he was not.
So Bob Ross says, make love to your canvas.
You'd never catch him cutting off an ear.
This is how you paint happy trees. Are you ready?
Happy trees. Here's a happy little tree.
Can you guess why he was always happy? Wasn't he always stoned?
What does Bob Ross say? There are only happy mistakes. Yes, you guys.
It's no mistake.
Squiggle, 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 squiggle.
These nights are one of the business's most popular.
I grew up as a kid, and I would sit with my coloring book, and I would color like he did on his paintings, and I tried to be Bob Ross.
He's always about going with the flow and creating your own world. And
so let's go with the flow. And end this story the way Bob Ross would.
He'd say God bless, but he'd wave his hand like this, kind of. He'd say thank you and God bless.
For next, this is Ann Herbst.
Canvas and Cocktails say they have 2,000 wigs on order, so many more Bob Ross classes in the future. Our future is your feedback on reporters in the hurricane. A storm surge of emails and social media comments. I'll share some of your thoughtful views next. Absolutely astonished by the sheer number of you who wrote in to answer my question about whether you find reporters out in the storm useful or whether you find it overwrought and self-serving for journalists to be out in the storm. As promised, I will read every single word that you have sent to us, a few of your perspectives to close the show this evening. Bill Luster at Denver says he finds it very useful, compelling. Zachary Langer says, disgusting. What happens when a reporter gets killed eventually? Carrie Groce says, it does give us an idea of what a hurricane really looks and feels like, but Ken White finds it to be grandstanding, plain and simple. Kevin says it keeps the idiots out of the way, but Bill Brown says simply unnecessary. Keep the feedback coming. Next at 9news.com, #HeyNext. See you next time.